Hey, hello everyone. I'm Benjamin Joffe, and actually, I will say I was talking with Lindsay earlier, and I said, "Oh, I did we discuss maybe having a bio? Should I send you a bio?" And she said, "No, I should." In sort of the informal nature of these sessions, she said she's having people sort of introduce themselves, and I overheard my wife talking with her mother, my mother-in-law, earlier this evening, and I thought that bit of the conversation I overheard is probably the best intro I could give you. I am in my 12th year teaching at the Hewitt School, and I taught at the Marymount School before that, both all-girls schools in New York City. Um, but what I overheard was my wife saying to her mother something like, "Yeah, Benj," they call me Benj in my family. They said, "Yeah, Benj is doing a session this evening on overload management." And there was a pause, and then my wife says, "No, he's giving the session." And I thought, yeah, because if you've had a front row seat to my experience of the pandemic, or if you've really looked at, I say it, kind of all of our experiences, I know I'm thinking, am I the right person to be giving this session? And maybe if you were to tell my bosses, oh, he's going to give a session on overload management, was he filling in for someone? But actually, I will say, I think really specifically, um, I wanted to word the session such that really our agenda is how can we be a support? And specifically, how can we be a support for our students? And how can we be a support for their parents and for ourselves? Because in no way are any of us managing overload in a way that stands out that should be on some kind of poster. The other bit I also realized is that as I was doing dishes before the session, I got water all over the button-down shirt I had planned to wear for this evening, and I thought, okay, because that's how it goes. And so I put on my t-shirt and sweatshirt. But let's get started. I always like to start a session with a bit of writing. The moment for you to kind of get centered and think about both why you came this evening and also maybe in addition to what brought you here, kind of where you hope to go. So I'm going to ask you two questions. If you're someone who likes to write these things down with a pen and pencil, and if you have it handy, go for it. If you want to open up some sort of software app on your phone or device, laptop, whatever you're watching on, and do that. Or if you're just feeling exhausted and you just made it, and all you want to do is sit and think about these questions, that's also a great option. So my two questions to you are this. In one of the bits about this session for this evening, there was an opening line that says something to the effect of, even our best laid plans by now at this point in the year may have fallen apart. So my first question to you is, what is something that was on your sort of best laid plans list that seems to have fallen apart between late August and now almost mid-October? So again, what's something that you had planned that just fell through? It was a really great idea and it just fell through.
I'm putting these in the chat as well for anyone who is not great at just hearing and remembering. It's there as well for you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate it. And the second question, and again, you can choose to focus just on that first question. I know some people write faster than others. Maybe you'll do the second question also. Maybe you'll choose the second question. Second question is, we hear a phrase that's kind of been around forever around us. Then the phrase is, half of life is showing up. It has sort of various forms. Some people have more battle-oriented language. Sort of 80% of the battle is showing up or something like that. I'm less battle-oriented. Then if you're sort of, I don't know, business school-minded, I've heard also 80% of success is showing up. I was researching it, 90% is sometimes what they say. Let's say your percentage, call it 50%, or 80 or 90. If 80% of life is just showing up, my next question to you is, what's the other 20%? Or if it's 50, if 50 is showing up, what's the other 50%? What do you need to get to 100%? So again, the first question is what sort of fell apart that was really your sort of top plan? It just fell through between the start of the year and now. And second question, if half of life is showing up, or 80 or 90%, what's the other 50 or 20 or 10%? You take a moment, and if you're watching this on YouTube later on, you can take as much time as the live participants. You can pause and write forever about either or both of these questions. And when you're ready, we can also sort of switch gears. And if anyone would like to unmute themselves and share. And I always say, with my students, I say, try as best you can to share exactly what you wrote. We don't, our instinct is often to sort of speak extemporaneously or say, well, you know, I meant to say, but we've all just shown up, and that's great. So if you want to speak extemporaneously and finish a thought you didn't complete as you wrote it down, you can do that too. So would anybody like to share a response to either of those questions? And I will say, since I can't see everyone, feel free to go. Oh, I see there's already someone.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Always the annoying one that is willing to talk. Okay, so what I really wanted to do was more comprehensible input, especially in Latin 1, with more exchange between me and the students, more speaking. And I think maybe 2 of my students have their screens on. So right there, you know, there's some stuff you can do, but not at all what I'd hoped.
Yeah.
The other 20%, in my opinion, is the willingness to work hard and forgive yourself when you don't do as much as you want to do.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I want to take a moment and just think about both of those things. Thank you for that. What else? What do other people have? And again, you can choose to share your answer to either question. And go ahead and unmute yourself. And I will also say that one thing I am always, you'll probably hear me say at some point this evening that when I first started teaching, I was in the midst of doing improv. I live in New York City, and I was fortunate enough to be part of a school that taught with some of the just some of the most enjoyable moments, but also some of the most painful moments. And so I am kind of leaning in during Zoom time. I think it's a really great moment if we extend a little bit of silence, not too much because it's recorded, but if you want to take a second and be that person to break that silence. Let's hear from someone else. Again, what was something that just kind of fell apart? And what was something, and what's the other 20 or 50 or 10% of life success or something?
Someone in the chat has said, I think because they have a noisy background, that the other 20% is persistent effort. And and the same person also said in response to number 1, the thing that fell apart, I'm doing far less pronunciation practice than I would like because while we haven't technically lost instructional minutes, we've lost a lot of on-task time to cleaning and tech management.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, definitely. And in fact, I will say to the first one, it's resonating so much with me. I will say quite candidly that when you say sort of a challenge of persistent effort, I know for me, I'm giving effort, but I also say, has every day so far since the school year start been my best efforts? Maybe as good as I could muster, but probably not on the scale if you were to chart effort of teaching in our best days. We're probably not having them. I know as a teacher, I'm not putting my best efforts in on every given day either. So I kind of relate to both of those. Thank you for that.
There's one more in the chat from Joy who said that her expectations have fallen apart, in particular in relation to pacing, curricular pacing, I assume.
Yeah, and I think actually, I think pacing is probably one of the biggest topics that people are almost resigning themselves before the year starts, to say, well, we're just not going to get as far as we normally do. And actually, that's a particular. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a particular area we're going to talk about tonight. In particular, a sort of strategy for it. So, uh, thank you for these. I'm seeing a bit more coming in the chat. Give space for one more response. Think about these things. And again, it's also sometimes when I hear other people, makes me think of certain things. In fact, some of the things people mention are making me think of certain things that I had planned that didn't go the way I expected.
Well, this is Kate. This is Kate speaking, and I wanted to say, before school began, I felt like the technology was not going to be a problem for
Mm,
me. After the spring, it went reasonably well, thinking about keeping everybody involved. But the hybrid mode for us has just totally defeated me in terms of thinking about how to involve everyone. So my attention is divided, and yeah, I feel defeated by trying to teach to two totally different audiences.
uh, and isn't that one of the? I remember to that point. I think that it's such a on the one hand a common challenge for us right now, and on the other hand, how could that possibly be a common challenge, right? I remember we all kind of were at that point in the spring where it started emerging what the fall might look like. And we all may live in different places and have heard different versions and thought about different versions. And when it started to emerge that would be a common challenge to be teaching kids at home who are zooming into a classroom where you're in, probably wearing a mask or maybe other protective gear, and teach to them in an engaging way. Oh gosh, that it, oh, it's a tough one, such a tough one. Absolutely. I saw some more things coming in the chat. If anybody wrote in the chat and wants to sort of amplify that for a bit, or maybe have Lindsay or me kind of point one other thing out because I see more people put that in, and then we'll.
I can
Oh, yeah.
relate to, there's one in the chat that I can really relate to from Kathleen about intending to use a lot more new tech. Edpuzzle, she said Edpuzzle, Loom. I've used some, but I had like, I mean, I knew it was ambitious. I had this ridiculously long list of like all these cool tools I wanted to employ. I had all the ways I wanted to use them. And then it turns out that Pear Deck takes 10 million hours to make. And so I was like, I have 5 preps and no time. That's not happening.
Yeah. And in fact, I think to that point that is another area. I'm glad that one was brought up because I think, one thing I think about a ton, if you heard about this session from some sort of social media space for Latin teachers, that means you've probably also seen a whole bunch of ideas about Pear Deck, GimKit, Edpuzzle, Kahoot, which was even something people may have used before, and a whole bunch of names I haven't seen. And that suddenly, all of a sudden, there's a peer pressure, societal pressure, or I should be using that. I should be learning how to use these things. How do I decide which one to use? And there's been so much talk about that. That's another area, particularly regarding strategies, that I want to tackle tonight. I'm glad that one got brought up. I will say, I'm going to show you a bit of tech that I use that'll be part of that. And that is, this is a bit of tech that I purchased in this. I paid the, this was not a free app. I paid the cost of it in the spring, and it came up, and that was a thing that came up in class. I think it was last week. It might have been 2 weeks ago. I just keep it at my desk, and I've been meaning to erase it. So, well, I love these ideas here. I want to add maybe a couple of my own, kind of based on what people are mentioning, and I think a couple things that come to mind for me. One of them, so I teach primarily middle school, I teach 7th and 8th grade. Hewitt School, again, it's an all-girls school. I have about 100 students in total over 7 different sections. And so I teach all this, yeah, all the 7s, all the 8s. There's about 45 students in 7th grade, about 45 in 8th grade, give or take a little bit more to kind of reach those numbers. And I also teach because before the pandemic, it was decided that we all would either, in addition to what we're doing, take on an advisory or teach, this won't make sense, but a 5th course. Now you will say, wait a second, you teach 7 sections. That's true. Last year, I actually taught 8 sections. But because of the way that our Latin classes are structured, I'm anomalous enough and they needed someone to teach an upper school. So I'm also teaching upper school, an 11th grade Latin epic and lyric class. It's only 3 students, but if you've ever prepped a class, it doesn't matter whether it's 3 or 23, you're still prepping that class, right? I had big plans for that 11th grade. The last time I taught that, because I'd really been in the middle school for a while, the last time I taught that was, I know because I keep going back to that folder, 2016-17. And those students are now, well off into college. And I got through this first bit of review lessons. I wrote up these really beautiful plans over the summer in what you might call spare time. And we did a lot of PD over the summer. So what was my vision of spare time over the summer wasn't really all that, additional or there. But I got this great thing that I wrote up for the first lesson for review. And that was the last bit that I had written up through there. The rest has really been bringing in what I need, but I also still feel comfortable enough that, and kind of figured that that whole plan would fall apart, that I felt wild enough to say, hey, I think I can do this. And I want to share with you 3 strategies this evening. Because I remember there was a learning specialist in our middle school a few years ago. And she used to say that if you're making lists for students, and really it's for ourselves too, keep it to 3, because if you go 4, it's a bit of a stretch for what we can handle and remember. And if it's 5, it's just not going to happen. So I want to keep it to 3 core lessons that I want you to be able to take away. And I want to start this first lesson with a bit of a visual. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment. And again, I'm going to ask you, as I share this screen, for you to share a bit. You'll unmute yourselves and say what you see. You can still keep your video off if you'd rather. But since I won't be able to see you because I'm sharing my screen, just go ahead and unmute yourself. I do this with students all the time. So there we go. Okay, and okay. Take a minute, take it in. And when you're ready, I will say just to share what you see. And I'll add even before then, when we're making observations, there are no right or wrong answers. So what do you see?
Someone who's very relaxed.
Okay, someone who's very relaxed. Maybe we're feeling a bit jealous. I haven't felt that calm and relaxed in a long time. What else? What else do people see? What a great way to start. Thank you for that.
In the chat, Lee has said a sleeping Cupid.
A sleeping Cupid, yeah. Pretty workable identification here. What else do people see? Let's build on that.
Something that looks incredibly soft, but is probably incredibly tough and hard from the materials.
Wow, what a great characterization. And in fact, what I love about what we did there, we started off with some, you might say, sort of concrete basics of what we're seeing. Actually, I think we started off with a bit of the vibe. We went to this is what this is, and something that it really does give the impression of softness, but our brains are telling us that is probably not soft to the touch. And of course, being in a museum, this is from the Met's Greek and Roman collection, there is no way we're going to ever be able to touch it, but we can bet, as per your observation, it's not as soft as it seems to be giving off. What a great thing to share. Thank you for that. What else do people see?
Laura has written collapsed in exhaustion.
Yeah, oh wow. Let's get real here. Yes, yes. This perhaps is not Cupid, but a teacher. Yeah, okay, collapse. Or a student, right? Or one of those students' parents. What else? Keep going. What do you see? In fact, I'm going to zoom in a bit. Again, no wrong answers. Maybe it's making you tired looking at this. It's making me tired and I'm presenting. What do you see? Let's zoom in a bit further.
Oh, you've got a couple people said in the chat, opposing materials, broken parts, cracks.
Yeah, especially if we look kind of around here. I love that you can see this really clear line of that opposing materials. I love how you put that. And the closer we look, we see those cracks, imperfections. One thing the Met does really well with its images of art is its zooming is top notch. I mean, you can really, it's sort of like when high definition TV first came out, and we saw that celebrities don't have nearly as great skin as we thought in the 80s and 90s. It turns out they're just like us, right? Let's look a little closer at Eros.
Lee said veins in the marble echoing the veins in the body.
Okay, so yeah. Now I might be thinking a bit about the artist. Yeah. Let's hear one or two more. I'll zoom back out.
I can't tell whether the body looks so relaxed that it is natural or whether it looks so relaxed it's about to topple off of the marble. Right? There's a funny gesture there as the arm is draping. It's so relaxed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And in fact, it's making me wonder, it's making me think about how, our iPhones, let's say, if you have an iPhone, there's something so beautiful in its simplicity. It's become so simple, they've removed the button. My iPhone is the 6S. And I got it new a couple of years ago, and it was so old then that I actually made money on the deal because they were happy to get rid of it. But there's something about the iPhone that's so simple and beautiful, but it's the most complex thing underneath the hood, so to speak. And your observation is making me wonder, what is the physics behind this thing? Is it really as gentle in its draping over the marble? Is it really as easily laid down as the image of Eros appears to be? Or is it about to topple over? Did a curator have to spend weeks making sure this thing was in good shape? And in fact, I will say, having visited the Met, it's probably the number one reason I've stuck around in New York City for about 20, 25 years. And I've seen this thing removed and then returned. And it always makes me wonder, partly it might have gone on display somewhere else, but perhaps it's a really complex thing to pick up. Well, let's take another moment. And we are teachers here, so we're going to go meta. And it's probably a cruel thing for me to ask you to go meta at 7:30 on a Wednesday night in October during a pandemic. You barely had it. I know for me, I barely had enough bandwidth to tackle the conversation as we have it. Well, let's go meta for a moment. What do you notice, or I should say, what did you notice about the conversation about the work of art? I'll say that again. So we talked about the work of art as we see. We made some observations, no right or wrong answers. But now let me ask you, what did you notice about how we talked about the work of art? Again, it's a tough question. But if it helps, I also ask that kind of question to my middle schoolers. Maybe that made it worse. You're like, oh my God, they can handle it, but it's 7:30 at night on a Wednesday. It's a tough one. It's a tough question. What happened during the conversation?
Some people in the chat have said some things. Kathleen says we began to focus on flaws.
Oh, that's interesting.
And Amy mentioned that we were using brief, pithy statements.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I love that. I feel like that could be the next hour, and we don't even have an hour to think about that. And in fact, neither of those things were what I had in mind. We had this, we kind of went to flaws, right? What started out maybe broad, we started talking about the vibe, we named it a bit about the materials, but the further we went in, we kind of just went for, chinua achebe's, but things fall apart, entropy. We just noticed flaws. Okay.
Amy says that she also was jealous of how peaceful he looks.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And of course, I think it's such a relevant thing too, because the art here is doing what it should, which is it's provoking in us, evoking in us feeling. It's doing its job. The artist from however many years ago is somehow still successful because we're feeling this. And maybe it's resonant to us in a way right now that it wasn't, that it wouldn't have been last year. I mean, we're educators, we're always exhausted to some degree, but our exhaustion is pretty real.
Sharon also said that we zoomed in to try to dig deeper.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's really key. Yeah. And I love, what a pedagogical observation too, right? We may start off with kind of big picture, but like anything else, if we're teaching, we can zoom in much further. In fact, now's a good time for me to ask the question that I didn't ask at the start of this. And since again, I can't see everyone, and if you're on video or not, that's totally okay. But however you feel comfortable answering the question. In fact, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a moment. In fact, let me see. Hold on one second. I see. I will do this. And I'm going to go into my gallery view so I can see as many faces. If you feel comfortable putting on your video, great. If not, that's totally okay also. My question to you is, are we a room full of Latin teachers? And I'll ask it easier since most people are not necessarily on screen. Is anyone not a Latin teacher here?
Well, I know there's at least one.
Okay. Yeah. Was that line from Life of Brian? We're all individuals. We're all individuals. I'm not, you know.
I decided to stay home this year because I just turned 78. I was teaching 7th and 8th graders, and I just thought because of COVID, it was unfortunately a little bit too dangerous. So we left it with the principal, the priest, our pastor's doing it, and if a vaccine comes out, I will go back in this year. But I'm very disappointed not to be teaching, but my family's kind of put a lot of pressure on me not to do it.
Harriet, thank you for sharing that. I think that it's just one of 1,000 millions of stories that we're all thinking about. Thank you for coming tonight. I think I think it's fantastic that you're here.
Oh, I haven't missed any of them. They've been great.
Oh, fantastic. I will also say in that moment, one thing for me, I was supposed to go in to teach on Friday. And I mentioned I live in New York. And I was we were supposed to teach in person. It was going to be my first time teaching in person. We had been remote up until now. Our schedules changed a ton. And I had gone in on Monday, and it was Friday. Same time I went in on Monday. On Monday, there was nobody on the subway. I take the subway and the bus to get to work. Nobody, practically empty, and anyone who was there had masks on. Got on the bus, practically empty, but everybody had masks. That was Monday. Then I got to show up on Friday, same time, and there's 6 people on the platform without masks, and that was unsettling to me. 3 of them had masks, but they were sitting right here. And then the train pulls up, and it's packed, and not everybody's wearing masks. And I just froze, got shaky, and I said, "The hell with this," and I left. And I went back home, and I texted my boss, and I said, I explained what I saw, and I said, I'm going to email my students. And she said she'd let them know. It was a class of 3. It was a really small group. And I said, I'm still shaky now. And I taught, and I was shaky. And I don't remember much of what I taught then, but I taught it. I kind of do. But I think also, yeah, I mean, Faye, I appreciate you sharing that, because there are 1,000 stories of us needing to kind of take care of ourselves now. And I think it sort of speaks to kind of why we're here. And we'll get back to those observations and the meta part of it, which is, how do we manage overload? In fact, it kind of speaks to 2 of the things I want to share with you. I mentioned there were going to be 3. Well, the first one here is observation. Someone mentioned one of those things that you had big plans for, and they kind of fell apart, was learning all the tech. I've never heard the word Pear Deck before this spring, and I've never used it. I keep thinking I will, but our school changed to a new learning management system this summer. And I spent weeks having to learn it, and I'm still learning it. It's our 3rd learning management system in 3 years. That's a lot. I thought I nailed it last year, and then they got rid of it, so I had to start again. So I didn't have the energy to learn a new tech anything. And so that's sort of one part, but I say observation. One of the things that's at the core, let's think about that second question that we tackled to start this session. The second question was, what's the other 20%? We've shown up, right? We should all be proud that we showed up, whether we had to make choices. Like I tried to show up on Friday and I didn't. And I ended up, to be honest, and this is just sort of who I am, I was in tears when I talked with my students, because I still sort of now, that's what the moment is about. But we showed up in whatever capacity that we have. We're here tonight. It doesn't matter if we have our video on or not. Maybe you're watching this now, weeks later. You've shown up, you're watching it. We have big plans and they didn't happen. But really what's behind what's the other 20% is, what is the essence of our lessons? What is the essence? Why are we doing what we're doing? If most of us are teaching Latin, and it seems from the group that we are, I use the Cambridge Latin course. And there are 2 pieces that are in each chapter, stage, if you know Cambridge, right? There's the about the language, and there's the vocab. Those are sort of core pieces. There are many of us that will throw all 6 cases into Unit 1, and they really only introduce 3. What is the core of every stage? Stage 1's pretty basic, right? If that's what it tells us to teach, that's what we're teaching. If that's the vocab at the end of the stage, we don't have to add more. If we have an essence, and actually neither of those is really what's core in teaching Latin. We're teaching them how to read. Many of us do a sort of spoken component, and as was shared at the beginning of this session, we've had big plans to talk through. We probably spent the summer thinking about how we're going to talk. You're going to say, how are you doing? And you're going to develop conversation. But who wants to tell someone sitting at home that they have to turn their video on when they have Zoom fatigue and eyes that are dry as hell, right? or 1,001 other reasons why they just don't want to show their face right now. So how do we tackle that? When we think about the extra 20%, because we've already shown up, we've already done a good amount of what we need to do, the extra 20% says, how do we just get at the core of this lesson? Well, to me, what I've realized in this fall, but also I think what kind of started by diving into looking at Greek and Roman art. I have the very good fortune. I mean, I live in New York City, which means I live near the Met. But in the digital world, I can be a member of Kane. I don't live in New England. And by the way, it was on my to-do list today to sign up for my membership. I didn't get there, but you can bet, I'm saying this now publicly, that I will become a member of Kane. So, plug for that. It may not happen tomorrow, but it will happen. And suddenly the Met geography is irrelevant. We get to join sessions and conferences and memberships and talk with people. The world is flat right now. And what's at the essence of every one of our lessons is observations. If there were math teachers here, English teachers here, science teachers here, art teachers here, we could all say that everything that we learn really goes down to observation. We may feel like we have to come up with Edpuzzle, Gimkit, Kahoot, Pear Deck stuff and say, does anyone have anything for stage 24? Or we can do what we know we need to do. The essence of teaching Latin is let's read a bit. What do you see? Are we teaching the present passive infinitive? I only remembered that I'm teaching that because someone posted today on social media that stage 34 has that. I think I'm teaching stage 34 tomorrow. I'm not sure in my advanced class. No, it's Friday. But I'll get there and we'll read a passage and I'll say, what do we see? If I'm teaching stage 1 and we're learning that the verb goes at the end, I'll just say, what do we see? We're looking at the bust of Caecilius on the cover of the book. What do we see? If we're looking at a cute Cupid falling asleep, what do we see? What do we feel? Which, by the way, leads to the second thing that I want to point towards that we should be thinking about right now. And I want to show you a few more things. That second thing is what's so key. And actually, I will think it's usually how I would start a session, but like happens in Zoom classes, sometimes I get to it later. Sometimes I get to it when the kids are in breakout rooms. But it was something John Bracey said last week. And if you weren't at John Bracey's session, check it out on YouTube. There was something that resonated with me. And he talked about the importance of taking attendance at the start of class. That seems like the part that you could do while the kids are already working. We have Zoom. We figured out we have names in front of us. Zoom actually, if you use Zoom, but other video sessions actually do this too, you could find out later who attended your session. But why do we take attendance and say, hey, I remember John saying, hey there, Amy. Hello, Olivia. Hello, Stacy. Hello, Chad. All the names, because you have to connect. The number 2 item, although I couldn't pick which one to go first, is how are you? And even more than that, when we don't just say, how are you? And make sure that kids have a chance to unmute themselves and respond. My own students started getting into the habit of starting with a thumbs up or thumbs down, and it changes as they answer. They say like, ah, and they see one kid respond and another kid responds. Then there'll be enough kids that don't respond. They'll have their video off. But I always want to add, I'll say, in that moment of uncomfortable silence, which can become comfortable enough because there are far worse things than a few seconds of silence, I'll say, it's totally okay if you don't want to share how you're doing right now, because more important when someone asks how you're doing, when I'm asking how you're doing, is for you to check in. Maybe you haven't gotten up from your chair and stretched in the last 10 minutes. So when I'm doing attendance, go ahead and get up and stretch. Maybe you just have been going through one class after another all day. Maybe you had one class, maybe the whole day was asynchronous until Latin class. But maybe you haven't yet paused to just check in with yourself. How are you? Whether it's a writing bit where you're saying how you're doing, whether it's a thumbs up, thumbs down, whether it's an unmute, because we always have kids that'll be more comfortable sharing and those that won't. It's never been more important to make sure that our classrooms are spaces where we are genuinely conveying how you doing. And the other side of that is let them know how you're doing. Like it's who I am. That when I ended up in tears a few times in the spring, and I realized that that's kind of, it's more important than anything we can put out there. They're going to do lessons, and I'm going to show you the third part, which is far more structured, which allows me to be as present in the moment. The best way you can let them know how that you can give them a space to let them know that you care how they're doing is to let them know that you're just as exhausted as maybe all of us are seeing in that arrow statue. Or I have a class that is last period of the day and they've always assigned Latin for last period. How are we all doing? Probably about as good as we were last week this time, right? Or it's the class right after lunch. I didn't want to return to Zoom after lunch, or I didn't have a chance to make myself lunch, or I have to make all of my lunches and I'm a 7th grader because my parents are working, or any scenario, whether they share it or not. It's the most important thing to just check in. That's 2 things. Everything we do can be observation, and every time we connect with kids, because that's what it means to be synchronous. You know, we're Latin teachers, but we may some of us know Greek. So when the terms asynchronous and synchronous came in, we were already equipped enough to know what the roots were for that. Synchronous time, sync, go ahead. That's the thing. We're all separate, but let's get together in that respect. And the best thing we can do, to go back to overload management, we're going to be overloaded. We're not going to be able to show up. Our plans will show up in the way that we expected. If we had goals of perfection before the pandemic, we barely can make it to the halfway point right now, but we can still make sure that we are connecting from afar and that we're showing that we are connecting. I want to show you something of the third category, which is pretty different from it. But I think that for me, it's what has allowed me to go from class to class. And we're going to do the same bit. I'm going to show you something, and you're going to make some observations. It's what has allowed me to be present in the moment. And I will say my original sort of framing for this third category was the question to all of you. How many of you have ever, maybe you do this now, maybe you did this before, or at some point in your life, made meals on Sunday for the rest of the week? Yeah. Okay. Lindsay has. I see another hand. Yeah. Maybe if you don't do it, yeah, say yes. My wife pointed out as I was talking with her through this session last night, my ideas, she pointed out, she said, this is not what you're doing. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? She says, at most you're meal planning. So what do you mean? And she was right. And here's what I mean by that. It was my intention to make meals for the year over the summer. Every summer, it's my intention to get a whole bunch done that I don't end up getting done. But never before have I gotten so little done over the summer in preparation for a school year when I needed it most, right? But I've also gotten in the habit of doing something that allows me to tackle the year in a way where if I've made the meals, if any of you know things like those Blue Apron or those meal plans that send you the ingredients, right? Maybe we've gotten as far as we've got the ingredients, we just need to put them together. Maybe we've gotten as far as just simply writing down what we intend to eat on Tuesday, and then through the week. That's pretty good. So let me do a show, don't tell before we get to that last bit that I think is super important. So again, I'm gonna share my screen. All right, let's see. Okay. Let's see that here. My desktop was not nearly as clean. I created a folder called Desktop Temp Space. It's very full, but I did it just before our session this evening. Yeah, calendars. Okay. I'm going to flip through some of the pages and then I'll ask you what you see. We could sit at June for a moment. And I can certainly make this bigger. In fact, let me do that. Let me kind of zoom in. Oop, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Do this. It's a bit tricky when it's, oh, there we go. There we go. Let's zoom in right here.
So Amy says she sees that it's a skeleton of what you want to read.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely a skeleton. What else do people see?
Color.
Color. Yes. Yes. Big fan of, and it's specifically purple. It's Unit 4 of Cambridge, by the way, but we're not doing just Unit 4, so that's where the color came from.
Office hours, making time to connect.
Yes, that would sound like I'm being magnanimous. In fact, that was one of the many things that has changed. I was originally supposed to go into work 1 day a week, and then they created office hours, and that is very important for me to be in person. And then it was supposed to be every other week, and then it changed back. And a lot of changes have been made to this. What else?
Lee says that she sees organized thought.
Okay, okay, yeah. What else? I can maybe go to some other part of the year. What else do people see?
Is there a weekly pattern? Am I just seeing this because this is what I do, or is this what you do also, where like the same day of the week, every week you do the same kind of thing, and so you have a routine that you keep?
It's a great question. This is the course that is the least structured of my courses, actually will say. And it's by design because there's only 3 of them. This is that extra course I was asked to teach. There's a definite pattern. Some things you may notice are numbers. I go deep in. This was my time in August. I have a wife and 2 small boys, and there was a period in August where the 3 of them went to, I would say, to my mother-in-law's, but my mother-in-law is not where she is, not her normal place in New Jersey, where they got a bit of time in the sun in the summer, and I stayed here in New York and had a bit of time to prep for the year. That's when I did all this math. I will say, for example, 4263 and 4466 and 11057. These are all meaningful numbers. 11057 is the 110th day of the school year, scheduled with 57 days left. I kind of felt before the year started that I wanted to count down before the year ends. So I just did that for myself. I've had to redo the numbers, and to make myself feel better and just to get out of my head, I just did that. It's not necessary at all. And you don't need to do this with your own stuff. It's the principle behind it. The numbers here represent the fact that this is a double period. And so I counted them differently. They decided that Tuesdays were going to be a double period for Latin Lit, for not Latin Lit, but a number of classes that day. And so on the one hand, this is the 41st class, but if I'm counting them twice, it's the 61st and 62nd class. And I figure in my planning, I want to keep that in mind. So I have 2 running numbers. This is 41, this is 42, 43, 44. That office hours was tacked on later. I was going to redo the numbers. Then I thought, all right, I should do real work, not just pretend numbers, because these are all going to change anyway. I bring all this up because the other thing you may notice, by the way, if we go all the way back, is that we started in stage 33. If any of you are familiar with Cambridge, stage 33 is actually tail end of Unit 3, the Green Book. This was a result because in the Latin class they had last year was really decimated by the pandemic, and so they didn't get nearly as far. We tend to use Unit 4 at our school in a really malleable way. If we're ready for advanced literature, if we even use Unit 4 at all. I love Cambridge. I stick with Cambridge, and so for me, Unit 4, I will be using it as a template as I jump to the epic and lyric poetry we're going to do. And in fact, at least for the time being, office hours are my temporary Catullus space. And I decide that day, how are you guys feeling? Should we do some Cambridge or should we do some Catullus? Catullus is hard for them because they're not yet ready. But underneath it, the last bit is review quiz 1, review quiz 2, review quiz 3. I have a series of review quizzes, and it's kind of anchoring me back in 2016, 17, when I last taught the course. I had this whole thing of, I want to make sure when we're doing advanced Latin, we want to make sure that they know their basics. And so I developed sort of a plan of review so that they're doing core vocab and core forms. And I'm messaging to them, if you know the first and second declension, present tense verbs, you're halfway there. It's sort of like having a best friend. These are your core group of friends, these forms. Everything else is acquaintances. And we've covered the core forms. So I'm trying to message that early. That's about what I prepped. I had big intentions to go deeper into prepping this, and I didn't get very far after that. But what this allows me to do, and I want to share with you that giving yourself some time, and that's different for everybody. Our messaging right now is often do the best you can with what you have, borrow someone's ed puzzle, give them kit, whatever. But I would encourage you, maybe it's this coming weekend, maybe it's an hour you suddenly were like, oh, I didn't expect to have this. Whatever time you need, take a look at the full year. It's going to change. The calendar's changed numerous times. This is an old version already. Take a look at the year. Give it a deep look, give it a simple look, whatever it is. Ask yourself how far you want to go and do the math backwards and just commit to that. How you cover that will necessarily change. But another thing I learned, I was asked over the summer, oh, we have 2 new students in the upper school. They've never taken Latin. Would you teach them middle school Latin before the year starts? And that's a tall order, and we've done that. And I had 12 weeks, and so I did the 12 stages of Cambridge. And what it taught me was, A, it gave me comfort with Zoom, but it also said, oh, I don't need to spend a lot of time on each stage. I've got an hour a week. What do I need to know that's most important? And I made a schedule, and I didn't think about it until we started. I wanted to. I always planned to. I'm a failed perfectionist, like many of us as Latin teachers. It's about the best, most giving thing I could say about my approach to pedagogy, failed perfectionism. But this anchor here allows me to do more prep if that's what I'm feeling, or no prep at all if that's all I can do. I can show up and say, oh, tomorrow, and by the way, I'm looking at this for the first time, realizing, oh, I don't have Latin tomorrow. It's Thursday. I kind of forgot, even though I knew this was Wednesday. I realized, oh, let's see. Yeah, professional blend, I taught them today. Okay, office hours tomorrow. Got it. We're almost done with stage 34. In fact, actually, I learned that this class is canceled. They're doing virtual college visits with the juniors. I have one more day with stage 34. We just started. All right. We did, by the way, for those paying attention at home, stage 34, we covered the future perfect. So I'll do that present passive infinitive. Someone noted, I'll make sure to look at a sentence and make some observations. And that'll be what we do. And the last thing I want to point out, just as sort of a contrast, because I know we're nearing the end of time, is this is actually a super intense, fast enough paced course because I know those kids. I'm going to check in with them, how they're doing. I have one kid that has her puppy in her lap through most of the class, and I love that puppy. I'm tearing up to think about that puppy, but that's a fast-paced class. I want to show you as a sort of contrast for this last bit. Again, the 3 things are making observations. That's every class. Reading a story, what do you see? Read a story aloud, what do you hear? There's no right or wrong answers. Even the kids that are reluctant can get that right and build confidence. And it's manageable for us. You're talking to parents about how their kid is doing. And they've emailed you during the pandemic to say, I'm worried about how she's doing in class. You get on the phone with them. You start by saying, how are you? What are you noticing about your daughter in Latin? And you've scheduled the call. You're doing those same 3 things. That's all you need to do. She'll tell you if it's mom, or he'll tell you if it's the dad, what it is that we're talking about. You don't need to prep anything. You just need to be present because you've scheduled it, and You need to ask about observations, what they're seeing, because that's why they want to talk anyway, if they're your students or they're their parents. And you can do those same 3 things for yourself. What am I, I showed up, I got dressed today, or for me, this was the second time because I got water over my button-down shirt for the session. I had a plan of what I wanted to talk about. I wrote a few notes about the 3 things, and I asked all of you what you see. I want to show you one last thing to sort of think about in terms of what you see. Latin 1A, this is our first year of Latin in 7th grade. There's a PDF. If we had more time, but I want to respect your time, I'll put this on the screen here. You can take a minute. What do you see? I'll make it a bit bigger. Oh, I want to do that. Let's hear one observation since we're sort of short on time.
Check boxes.
Check boxes, yes. This could work for Google Classroom or the new LMS that we have, or any number of things. You can print it out, you don't have to. It's a checkbox. It feels accomplishing to do something, right? What else? Well, in the interest of time, I will say, here's something outlandish. We're moving at a fast pace in Latin Lit, but this is Latin class. They meet as a half class. We are spending September and October on stage 1. I don't know anyone who spends 2 months on stage 1, but I'm proud of that. I spend a little less time in regular life on stage 1, but I'm also developing the habits because we're going to do that same thing in stage 2 and stage 3 and stage 4. I'm not going to tax myself and come up with different activities and crosswords and fun things. Romans didn't have a word for fun. Check it. They had words for joy, pleasure, not fun. Nothing fun, but there's deep joy and there's a lot of comfort in knowing this is what we're going to do. I share this at the beginning of the lesson in September, and they know. Do you know how great that feels for the overloaded kid that we got this planned, and Latin Lit and Latin 1 and Latin 1A and 1B, they all have calendars and they all have lesson plans like this, except Latin Lit. They know we're going to do stuff. I sometimes know what these mean going in. I have a better sense than I'm letting on, but a lot of the times it's 11:30 at night before I first realize what are the words I want to focus on that come from mater. I've planned it out, I've given myself a structure, and it's about as planned. It's not making meals for the week like I thought it was. It's more like my improv years before I started teaching. Can I get a suggestion from the audience? And I go with one word and I build the class from there because I don't have to. I'm going to ask them what they see, just like I'm asking you what you see. I'm going to ask them how they're doing. I'll put them in breakout rooms and they'll do a story. And we'll cover what we need to cover because I've thought about what's the core, because that's about what all of us can handle. But I'm also showing students and parents, and hopefully myself, when I don't doubt myself, that we're going to cover what we need to cover. And I will get them to whatever stage they need to get to. So. I'll stick around for questions, or I can also answer them later. I know it's after 8 o'clock. Thank you for sticking around, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. Anybody who has questions, I'm going to stop the recording if you want to ask a question off the recording. That way you don't have to feel pressure about that. And thank you, Ben.